In 1851, a Southern widow invited a slave into her home and rewrite her bloodline. Let me tell you about a woman named Catherine Whitmore and a choice she made that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. This is Georgia, 1851. Picture it. Hancock County, where the cotton grows so thick it looks like snow drifted across the fields, and the heat in August could make a grown man weep. The Whitmore plantation wasn't the biggest in the county, but it was respectable. 60 acres of prime land, a house with columns that caught the morning light just so, and 23 enslaved people whose labor kept the whole enterprise breathing. Now, Catherine. She was 26 years old that summer, which might not sound young to you, but back then, for a woman in her position, she was entering what they called a delicate age. She'd been married to Charles Whitmore for 8 years, 8 long years, if you ask me, though nobody was asking. Charles was 15 years her senior, a man who believed in order, discipline, and the divine right of men like him to rule over everything and everyone under their roof. When he smiled, which wasn't often, it never quite reached his eyes. You know the type. Charles had died that spring. Pneumonia, they said, though there were whispers. There are always whispers in places like that he'd been sick for months and simply refused to admit. Weakness, until it killed him, left Catherine a widow with no children, which was both a blessing and a curse in 1851. A blessing because she didn't have to watch a son turn into his father. A curse because without an heir, she was vulnerable in ways that mattered in that world. But here's what you need to understand about Catherine. She wasn't like the other plantation mistresses. She didn't have that hardness in her eyes, that casual cruelty that came so easy to women who'd been raised to see human beings as property. She'd come from a modest family in Savannah. Her father was a clerk, not a planter, and when she married Charles, she'd walked into a world she never quite fit into. She tried, Lord knows she tried. Wore the right dresses, said the right things at church, smiled at the right moments. But something in her resisted. Something in her stayed soft. Now let me tell you about Elijah. He was 19 that summer, though he looked younger, had one of those faces that made people underestimate him, which, if you think about it, might have been the thing that kept him alive. He'd been born on the Whitmore plantation, born into slavery like his mother before him, and he worked in the house mostly, serving at table, polishing silver, keeping the fires going in winter, carrying water in summer. The kind of work that made you invisible if you did it right. And Elijah had learned early how to be invisible. But here's the thing about Elijah, and this is important, he could read. Now, I know what you're thinking. In 1851, in Georgia, teaching an enslaved person to read was illegal. Could get you fined, could get you worse. But Elijah's mother, Sarah, she'd been owned by a different family before the Whitmores bought her, and that family had been Quakers, of all things. They'd taught her letters before Georgia made it a crime, and she'd taught Elijah in secret, in the dark hours before dawn, using whatever scraps of paper and lampblack she could find. By the time he was 19, Elijah could read better than most white men in Hancock County. He just never let anyone know it. The summer of 1851 brought something to Georgia that folks still talked about decades later. A heat wave so brutal that cotton wilted in the fields and 3 people in the county died from it. The air felt thick as wet wool, and at night, there was no relief. Just mosquitoes and the sound of people trying to breathe through the suffocating dark. It was on one of those nights, early August, I think, when even the cicadas seemed too exhausted to sing, that Catherine Whitmore did something she'd never done before. She called Elijah to the main house. Not to serve, not to fetch something. Just called him to the parlor where she sat alone, fanning herself with a piece of painted silk that didn't do a damn bit of good against that heat. Now, you have to picture this moment. The big house, mostly empty since Charles died. Catherine sitting in a high-back chair, wearing black morning clothes despite the heat because propriety demanded it. And Elijah standing in the doorway, every muscle in his body tense, because nothing good came from a white woman calling you to an empty room at night. Nothing. Elijah, she said, and her voice was soft, uncertain. Please come in. Close the door. Close the door. Those 3 words should have terrified him, and maybe they did. But he did what she asked because what choice did he have? He stepped into that parlor and closed the door behind him, and I imagine his heart was hammering so hard he could barely hear his own thoughts. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. There was something desperate in her eyes, something he'd never seen before. "I need you to teach me something," she finally said. Elijah waited. Silence was safer than speech. "I need you to teach me about the accounts," Catherine continued, her words coming faster now. "The plantation accounts. The ledgers. My husband's overseer, Mr. Dawson, he's been managing everything since Charles passed. But I don't trust him, Elijah. The numbers don't make sense to me. Things are disappearing, supplies, money, and I think he believes I'm too stupid to notice." She paused, twisted the fan in her hands. "Charles never let me near the business side of things. Said it wasn't a woman's concern. But now it's my concern, isn't it? This plantation is all I have, and I think Mr. Dawson is stealing from me." Now, think about what she was asking. Think about the risk. An enslaved man teaching a white widow about plantation finances? If anyone found out, if Dawson even suspected, well, I don't need to paint you a picture of what would happen to Elijah. Nothing good. Nothing survivable. But here's where it gets interesting. Catherine reached beside her chair and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. The plantation accounts, recorded in Charles Whitmore's cramped handwriting and then, after his death, in Dawson's flowing script. "I've been looking at these every night," she said quietly. "And I think there's a pattern. But I need someone who can think clearly, who can see what I'm missing. And you." She looked at him directly now. "You're clever, Elijah. I've watched you. You understand things. You listen." Elijah should have said no. Should have backed out of that room and never spoken of it again. But there was something in Catherine's voice, something in the way she looked at him, not through him, like he was a piece of furniture, but at him, like he was a person with a mind worth consulting. And before he could stop himself, he said, "What makes you think he's stealing, ma'am?" Catherine's shoulders dropped with relief. She opened the ledger, pointed to a column of numbers. "Here. Look. Every week for the past 2 months, there's an expense listed as general supplies, $20 one week, $15 the next, $18 the week after. But when I check the storehouse, there's nothing new. No tools, no cloth, no extra food for the quarters." Elijah looked at the numbers. He didn't move closer, didn't touch the book, that would have been too dangerous. But he could see from where he stood, and she was right. The pattern was obvious once you knew to look for it. "There's more," Catherine said, turning pages. "See this? 2 horses supposedly purchased in June. But we only have 1 new horse. I've checked the stables myself. Where's Mr. Dawson say the other one went?" Elijah asked carefully. "He says it died. Colic, he told me. But there's no record of a dead horse. No burial, no hide sold, nothing." Elijah felt his mind working despite the danger, despite the voice screaming at him to stay silent. "Has he got family in town?" he asked quietly. Catherine nodded slowly. "A brother. Runs a livestock trading business in Milledgeville." There it was. Elijah could see it clear as day. Dawson was buying horses on the Whitmore account, registering them in the ledger, then selling them through his brother and pocketing the profit. The general supplies were probably the same scheme, purchased on paper, never delivered, money split between Dawson and whatever merchants were in on the game. "I see it," Elijah said simply. Catherine looked at him with something like hope. "Can you help me prove it?" And that's when Elijah should have said no. That's when any sensible person would have backed away, returned to the quarters, kept his head down and his mouth shut. But there was something happening in that room, something neither of them had intended. For the first time in his life, Elijah was being asked his opinion, being treated like his mind had value. And for Catherine, sitting alone in that big house, drowning in a world of men who assumed she was too simple to understand her own business, Elijah represented something she desperately needed, an ally who had no reason to deceive her. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said quietly. "I can help you. Catherine closed the ledger and stood up. She was trembling slightly, and Elijah realized she was just as frightened as he was. "We'll have to be careful," she said. "If Dawson finds out." "He won't," Elijah interrupted, then caught himself. "You didn't interrupt white women." But Catherine didn't seem to notice or care. "Come back tomorrow night," she said. "Same time. We'll go through everything." Elijah nodded and turned to leave, but Catherine's voice stopped him at the door. "Elijah?" She hesitated. "Thank you. I know what I'm asking." He looked back at her, this woman in her mourning blacks, standing alone in a parlor full of her dead husband's furniture, and he saw something in her face he'd never expected to see. Recognition. She saw him. Really saw him. "Yes, ma'am," was all he said. Then he slipped out into the suffocating night, his mind racing. What neither of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that Dawson's nephew had been walking past the house that night, taking a shortcut from the overseer's quarters to the main road, and he'd seen Elijah enter the house, seen him close the door, seen him stay inside for more than 20 minutes. In 1851, in Georgia, on a plantation where the master was dead and the mistress was alone, 20 minutes was enough to start a wildfire of suspicion. And suspicion, well, that was more dangerous than any heat wave could ever be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where things start to unravel in ways nobody could have predicted. The next evening came on slow, the way dangerous things always do. The heat hadn't broken. If anything, it felt worse, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to crack. Elijah went about his duties that day the way he always did, carefully, quietly, making himself small. But inside, his mind was working overtime, turning over those numbers he'd seen in Catherine's ledger, piecing together the pattern of Dawson's theft. Now, let me tell you about James Dawson. He was 42 years old, had been an overseer for most of his adult life, moving from plantation to plantation across Middle Georgia. Some men took that job because it was all they could get. Dawson took it because he liked the power. He was tall, had a face like sun-dried leather, and carried a whip on his belt even when he didn't need it, just to remind folks it was there. When Charles Whitmore was alive, Dawson had to answer to someone. But with Charles dead and Catherine seemingly helpless, well, Dawson had started acting like he owned the place. That morning, Elijah noticed Dawson watching him. Nothing obvious, just watching. Standing near the barn when Elijah carried water to the house. Lingering by the kitchen when Elijah came to fetch Catherine's breakfast tray. The kind of attention that made your skin crawl, made you wonder what he knew or thought he knew. But Elijah kept his face blank, kept his movements steady. Years of survival had taught him how to disappear in plain sight. Come evening, Catherine called him again. Same time, same room. But this time, when Elijah slipped through the back entrance of the house, the way house servants always entered, through the kitchen and the narrow hallway, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Dawson's nephew, a boy of about 16 named Thomas, was sitting on the back steps, supposedly cleaning a saddle. But Elijah could feel the boy's eyes on him as he passed, watching, marking the time. Elijah's instinct screamed at him to turn around, to find an excuse, to not enter that house. But Catherine was expecting him. And more than that, and this is the part that's hard to explain, something in him didn't want to let her down. She trusted him with something real, something that mattered. In a life where you own nothing, not even yourself, that trust felt like something worth the risk. So he went in. Catherine was waiting in the same parlor, but this time she looked different. Her hair was pinned up hastily, and she'd removed the heavy morning jacket, sitting in just her black dress, improper by the standards of the day, but practical given the heat. The ledgers were spread across a small table, 3 of them now, going back 2 years. "I found more," she said the moment he entered, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Look at this, Elijah. Just look." She pointed to entries from 18 months ago, when Charles had still been alive. General expenses, listed throughout, small amounts that wouldn't raise suspicion. $10 here, 15 there. But consistent, week after week, month after month. He's been stealing from us for almost 2 years, Catherine said, and there was something raw in her voice. My husband was dying, getting sicker every month, and Dawson was robbing him blind. And Charles never noticed because. She stopped, her hand trembling on the page. Because he trusted Dawson more than he ever trusted me. Elijah moved closer to the table, forgetting for a moment to maintain the proper distance. He studied the entries, his mind calculating. This here, he said softly, pointing but not touching. June of last year. $40 for cottonseed purchase. But look, he gestured to another ledger. The planting records show y'all used seed saved from the previous harvest. No purchase needed. Catherine stared at him. How did you? She started, then shook her head. You can read the planting records too? Yes, ma'am, Elijah said quietly. My mother taught me. Before it became illegal. Something shifted in Catherine's expression. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Elijah saw the moment when the full weight of what he just admitted settled between them. In Georgia in 1851, a literate enslaved person was a threat, a weapon that could forge passes, read newspapers, understand the very documents that bound them in chains. By telling her this secret, Elijah had put his life in her hands as surely as if he'd handed her a loaded pistol. I won't tell anyone, Catherine said softly. I promise you, Elijah. That secret is safe with me. And here's the thing, he believed her. God help him, he believed her. They worked through the ledgers for the next hour, tracking Dawson's theft, building a pattern so clear it couldn't be denied. Phantom purchases, inflated costs, missing inventory. By Elijah's calculation, Dawson had stolen close to $800 over 2 years. In 1851, that was a fortune. What will you do? Elijah asked finally. Catherine sat back, her face drawn. I have to confront him. Dismiss him. But she looked frightened now. He won't go quietly, will he? A man like that. And I'm alone here. No husband, no sons, no brothers. Just me. You got the law on your side. Elijah offered, though even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. Catherine laughed, a bitter sound. The law? You think Sheriff Hammond is going to take the word of a widow against a man like Dawson? They drink together, Elijah. They're friends. And even if Hammond believed me, what then? Dawson gets run out of the county, and I'm left with a reputation as a woman who can't manage her own affairs, who needs to go crying to the law because she can't control her overseer. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark fields. In this world, a woman who shows weakness doesn't survive. We're already suspect, already assumed to be incompetent. If I make an accusation I can't prove absolutely, I'll be the one who suffers for it. Elijah understood. Different chains, maybe, but chains nonetheless. That's when they heard it. Footsteps on the front porch. Heavy boots, moving slow and deliberate. Then a knock on the front door. 3 hard raps that seemed to shake the whole house. Catherine and Elijah locked eyes, and in that instant, they both knew. This was wrong. Nobody came calling at this hour. Nobody knocked like that unless they were making a point. Stay here, Catherine whispered, but Elijah was already moving toward the hallway that led to the back of the house. She caught his arm, actually grabbed his arm, which in any other circumstance would have been unthinkable. Wait, she said. If you run, it looks like guilt. Another knock, harder this time. Catherine straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and walked to the front door. Elijah stayed in the parlor, but positioned himself where he could hear. When Catherine opened the door, Dawson's voice rolled in like thunder. Mrs. Whitmore, forgive the late hour, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. We? Catherine asked, and Elijah could hear the forced calm in her voice. Myself and young Thomas here. Ma'am, my nephew tells me he's seen your houseboy Elijah entering the main house after dark. 2 nights in a row now. Staying inside for extended periods. Alone with you. There it was. The accusation unspoken but clear as daylight. Elijah has been helping me with some household accounts, Catherine said, her voice steady. Is there a problem with that, Mr. Dawson? Household accounts. Dawson's voice dripped with skepticism. Ma'am, with all due respect, that boy can't read or write. What possible help could he be with accounts? He's been inventorying the household items, Catherine replied smoothly, taking stock of what we have. I asked him to do so. At night, behind closed doors. I wasn't aware I needed to explain my household management decisions to my overseer, Mr. Dawson. The temperature in that conversation dropped about 20 degrees. Elijah could practically feel the shift in power, could hear in Catherine's voice that she was done being treated like a child who needed minding. Mrs. Whitmore, Dawson said, and now his voice had an edge to it. I'm going to speak plainly. This looks bad. A young Negro buck, alone with a white widow, in the dark. People will talk. Already are talking. For your own reputation, ma'am, I strongly suggest you send that boy back to the quarters and conduct your business during daylight hours with proper supervision. Or what, Mr. Dawson? Silence. Dangerous silence. Ma'am? I asked, or what? Catherine's voice was ice now. What will you do if I refuse to take orders in my own home? Will you go to the neighbors? To the sheriff? And tell them what, exactly? That you don't approve of how I manage my household? That you think you know better than me what's appropriate under my own roof? I'm thinking of your welfare. No, Mr. Dawson, you're thinking of your authority, which, I'm beginning to realize, you've extended far beyond its proper bounds. Elijah's heart was hammering. She was confronting him. Now, without the proof organized, without a plan. And she was doing it because Dawson had backed her into a corner, had forced her hand by threatening Elijah. Mrs. Whitmore, I think you're overwrought. Get off my porch, Mr. Dawson. Ma'am, I really must insist. You must insist on nothing. This is my property, my home, and I'm telling you to leave. Now. There was a long, terrible pause. Then Dawson's voice came low and mean. You're making a mistake, ma'am. A serious mistake. Come morning, we'll see how serious. Footsteps retreated. The door closed. And when Catherine walked back into the parlor, Elijah could see she was shaking, not with fear, but with rage. He knows, she said quietly, or suspects. Either way, he's going to move against us. Us, Elijah said before he could stop himself. Catherine looked at him. Yes, us. Because we're in this together now, whether we meant to be or not. She walked to the table and started gathering the ledgers. You need to go back to the quarters. Don't come to the house tomorrow. Don't give him any more ammunition. But Elijah, she turned to face him. This isn't over. I'm going to stop him. I'm going to prove what he's done. And I'm going to make sure you're protected. Ma'am, you can't. I can, and I will. Her voice was fierce now. All the uncertainty from earlier nights burned away. You helped me see what he was doing. You trusted me with your secret. I'm not going to let him hurt you for that. Elijah wanted to tell her that her promises meant nothing in the face of Georgia law in 1851, that good intentions couldn't stop a lynch mob, that she didn't understand the world he lived in. But looking at her face, he realized she understood more than he'd given her credit for. She knew the risk. She was choosing it anyway. Go, she said softly. Quickly, through the back. Elijah went, slipping out into the suffocating night. But as he made his way back toward the slave quarters, moving through the shadows between the buildings, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Thomas, Dawson's nephew, standing near the well, watching. And next to him, barely visible in the darkness, was his Uncle James. Both of them, silent and still, tracking Elijah's movements. They knew. They'd set a trap and Catherine had walked right into it. And Elijah? He was caught in the middle of something that could only end one way, badly. He made it back to the quarters, to the small cabin he shared with his mother and two others. Sarah took one look at his face and knew. What did you do? She whispered. I tried to help, Elijah said quietly. Help who? Mrs. Whitmore. She asked me. No. His mother grabbed his shoulders. No, no, no. Elijah, you didn't. Tell me you didn't get involved with the mistress. Not like that, Mama. She needed help with the accounts. Dawson's been stealing, and she asked me to. I don't care what she asked you to do. Sarah's voice was urgent, terrified. You're a Negro man alone with a white woman. That's all anyone will see. That's all anyone will care about. The why doesn't matter, baby. The why never matters. Elijah knew she was right. Deep down, he'd known it all along. But he'd let himself hope, just for a moment, that intelligence and truth and common decency might matter more than the color of his skin. Outside, the night pressed down on them, heavy and hot. Somewhere in the darkness, Dawson was planning his next move. And morning was coming whether they were ready for it or not. What happened next would change everything. But I need you to understand something before we go on. In that moment, in that cabin, Elijah made a choice. He could run. There were paths north, dangerous but possible. His mother was begging him to disappear into the night before Dawson could make his move. But Elijah thought about Catherine, standing alone in that big house, about to face down a man who'd been stealing from her for 2 years. He thought about her promise to protect him. And he thought about the ledgers, the proof they'd built together. Morning came like a judgment. The sun rose blood red over the cotton fields, and with it came a tension you could almost taste. Elijah woke before dawn, not that he'd slept much anyway, and went about his duties with a kind of careful precision that came from knowing eyes were on him. Every movement measured, every word spoken soft and proper. His mother watched him with the kind of fear only a parent knows, the fear of seeing your child walk toward danger and being powerless to stop it. Now, here's what you need to understand about plantations in 1851. They weren't just farms. They were little kingdoms, complete with their own rules, their own hierarchies, their own systems of justice that had nothing to do with courts or law. And when something threatened that order, when the lines between master and slave, between white and black, between power and powerlessness got blurred, well, people reacted. Violently, if they thought they needed to. By mid-morning, the whispers had already started. Elijah could feel them like spider webs brushing his skin as he worked. The other enslaved people, folks he'd known his whole life, gave him looks that ranged from sympathy to anger. Because see, when one person stepped out of line, when one person drew the wrong kind of attention, everybody suffered for it. Rations got cut. Privileges got revoked. The overseer's temper got shorter, and his whip got busier. Old Moses, who'd been on the Whitmore plantation longer than anyone, pulled Elijah aside near the well. "Boy," he said quietly, his voice gravelly with age and wisdom, "whatever you think you're doing, stop. That white woman can't save you. Don't matter if she wants to. Don't matter if she tries. In the end, she's white and you're not, and that's the only truth that matters in Georgia." "I know that," Elijah said. "Do you? 'Cause from where I'm standing, you're acting like you forgot it." Before Elijah could respond, they heard the sound of horses. 3 of them, coming up the main road at a trot. Elijah's stomach dropped because he recognized the riders. Sheriff Hammond, a big man with a red face and a badge that made him dangerous. Dawson, sitting straight in his saddle like he owned the world. And a third man Elijah didn't recognize at first, but then did. Reverend Pickett from the Baptist church in town, a man whose presence meant this was about more than just theft or accounts. This was about morality, about sin, about the kind of accusations that got people killed. They dismounted at the main house, and within minutes, a house girl came running to find Elijah. "Mistress wants you," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "Right now." They all in the parlor waiting. Elijah's mother materialized beside him like a ghost. She didn't say anything, just looked at him with eyes that held 2 decades of grief and terror and love. Then she reached up and straightened his collar, a gesture so tender it nearly broke him. "Hold your head up," she whispered. "Whatever happens, you hold your head up." Elijah walked to the house feeling like a man walking to his own hanging. The August sun beat down merciless, and his shirt stuck to his back with sweat that had nothing to do with the heat. When he entered through the back door, because even now, even being summoned, he couldn't use the front entrance, he could hear voices from the parlor. Angry voices. Catherine's cutting through them like a knife. I will not be interrogated in my own home about my household management, Sheriff Hammond. I will not. Ma'am, with all due respect, Mr. Dawson here has made some serious allegations. Mr. Dawson is a thief. Silence. Complete, shocked silence. Elijah stepped into the doorway of the parlor and saw them all frozen like a tableau. Catherine standing by the fireplace, still in her mourning black, but looking fierce as a hawk. Sheriff Hammond with his mouth hanging open. Dawson red-faced with fury, and Reverend Pickett looking, between them all like he'd stumbled into something far more complicated than he'd bargained for. Mrs. Whitmore, the Reverend said carefully, those are serious accusations. Not as serious as the ones being leveled at me, apparently. Catherine's eyes flashed. Tell me, Sheriff, what exactly is Mr. Dawson claiming? That I'm having inappropriate relations with my house servant? Is that the accusation? Say it plainly. Hammond shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, Mr. Dawson is concerned about impropriety. The boy has been seen entering your home after dark, staying extended periods. The boy's name is Elijah, and he's 19 years old, which makes him a man, not a boy. And yes, I asked him to help me with an inventory of household items. Is that illegal, Sheriff? It ain't about legal, Dawson started, but Catherine cut him off. Oh, it's very much about legal, Mr. Dawson. Because while you've been concerned about my household management, I've been concerned about yours. Tell the sheriff about the $800 you've stolen from this plantation over the past 2 years. The room exploded. Dawson was shouting. Hammond was trying to restore order. The Reverend was calling for calm. And Catherine stood in the center of it all, steady as stone, then pulled out the ledgers and dropped them on the table with a thud that silenced everyone. It's all here, she said coldly. Every phantom purchase, every inflated expense, every missing piece of inventory. My husband may have been too ill or too trusting to notice, but I'm neither. Dawson's face had gone from red to purple. Those are private business records. They're my business records now. My plantation. My accounts. And they show a clear pattern of theft. She turned to Hammond. Sheriff, I'm formally accusing James Dawson of embezzlement. I want him removed from my property immediately, and I want a full investigation. Now hold on, Hammond said, raising his hands. Mrs. Whitmore, these are serious charges you're making. You can't just. I can't? But he can accuse me of impropriety with no evidence beyond his nephew's gossip, and that's acceptable? No, Sheriff. Either we're going to talk about actual crimes with actual evidence, or everyone can leave my house right now. This is the moment, and I want you to really see this, where everything hung in the balance. Because Catherine had just done something almost unheard of for a woman in her position. She'd gone on the offensive. She'd refused to be shamed or cowed. And she'd put powerful men in a position where they had to take her seriously or admit they'd come to her house to intimidate her without cause. Dawson made his mistake then. He let his rage get the better of him. You're protecting him, he snarled, pointing at Elijah. That's what this is about. You've let that Negro get ideas above his station, and now you're making up lies to save him. Save him from what? Catherine asked quietly. From your false accusations? From your attempt to distract from your own crimes by creating a scandal? He can read, Dawson shouted. Did you know that? That boy can read and write. I've suspected it for months. That's illegal, Mrs. Whitmore. That's a crime right there. The room went cold. Elijah felt every eye turn to him. His mother's warning echoed in his head. The why doesn't matter. The why never matters. Catherine didn't flinch. So can I, Mr. Dawson. So can the sheriff and the reverend and half the county. Reading isn't a crime. Teaching a slave to read is a crime. And since Elijah learned from his mother before Georgia passed that law, and since his mother learned before it was illegal, there's no crime here either. Just a man grasping at straws. But Dawson wasn't done. He turned to Elijah directly. Tell them, he demanded. Tell them what you and the mistress have really been doing in here at night. Tell them the truth. Elijah knew this moment, had known it was coming. Every enslaved person lived with this moment hanging over their head, the moment when a white person demanded something of you. and your answer could mean the difference between life and death, but there was no right answer. Tell the truth and be called a liar. Lie and be called guilty. Stay silent and be called insolent. He looked at Catherine, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then he looked at Dawson, at Hammond, at the Reverend. Mrs. Whitmore asked me to help her understand the accounts, Elijah said carefully, keeping his voice respectful, neutral. She showed me the ledgers. She asked if I could see patterns in the numbers. That's all that happened, sir. Nothing more. He's lying, Dawson said flatly. Of course he's lying. He's protecting her, or she's protecting him, or both. Reverend Pickett cleared his throat. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should examine these ledgers Mrs. Whitmore mentioned. If there is evidence of theft, that would certainly explain alternative motives for certain accusations. Hammond didn't look happy, but he nodded. Let me see them books. Catherine handed them over, and for the next 20 minutes, the room was silent except for the rustling of pages and Hammond's occasional grunt. Dawson stood rigid, his jaw working. Elijah stayed frozen near the doorway, barely breathing. Finally, Hammond looked up. His face was troubled. Mrs. Whitmore, he said slowly, some of these entries do look unusual, but proving theft versus poor bookkeeping, that's difficult. And even if Mr. Dawson did make some errors. Errors? Catherine's voice could have cut glass. $800 in errors? What I'm saying, ma'am, is that this is complicated. It'll need time to sort out properly. But in the meantime, he looked at Elijah. It might be best if the boy here stays out of the main house. For appearances, you understand. Just until things settle down. So he's being punished, Catherine said flatly, for helping me discover a crime. He's being protected, ma'am. From talk. From suspicion. You should want that too. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue more, but Reverend Pickett spoke up. Mrs. Whitmore, the sheriff is trying to help you both. In times like these, appearance matters almost as much as truth. Perhaps it's wise to accept his counsel. It was over. Elijah could see it in Catherine's face, the moment when she realized she'd fought as hard as she could, but the weight of society, of expectation, of men's authority was too much. She'd forced them to take the theft seriously, which was more than most women in her position could have managed. But she couldn't protect Elijah. Not really. Not in ways that mattered. Fine, she said coldly. Elijah, you're dismissed. Return to your regular duties. Elijah nodded and turned to go, but Dawson's voice stopped him. Not so fast. Sheriff, I want that boy watched. Day and night. He knows too much, and he's too clever by half. This ain't over. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Dawson, Catherine said. That's a promise, ma'am. One way or another, the truth is going to come out. Elijah left the house feeling like his chest was wrapped in iron bands. He'd made it through. Survived. But at what cost? Dawson was still the overseer, still had power, and now he had a personal vendetta. And Catherine had shown her hand, burned bridges with the men who ran the county, all to defend an enslaved man's honor. That evening, as the sun set over the cotton fields, Elijah's mother came to him. Pack a bundle, she whispered. Tonight, some of the men, they'll help you get north. It ain't safe for you here no more. I can't leave, Elijah said. Why not? Because of her? His mother's voice was anguished. Baby, she can't save you. You saw that today. All she can do is make herself a target alongside you. He's going to hurt her, Mama. Dawson, when he can't get to me, he's going to hurt her. That ain't your problem. Yes, it is. Elijah looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. She trusted me. She saw me as a person, not property. That might not mean much in the grand scheme of things, but it means something to me. I can't just run and leave her to face him alone. Sarah looked at her son for a long moment, then pulled him into an embrace. You got your father's stubborn heart, she whispered. And his sense of justice. That's what got him killed, you know. That's what got him sold away from me before you could know him. Justice don't work the same for folks like us. I know, Elijah said, but I got to try anyway. What neither of them knew, what nobody knew yet, was that Dawson had made his own plans. Plans that would come to fruition within days. Plans that involved fire and fear and the kind of violence that made examples out of people who stepped out of line. But before we get to that, I need to tell you about what happened 3 nights later. Because that's when Catherine did something that changed everything. That's when this story stopped being about theft and accusations and became about something far more dangerous. 3 nights passed like years. Elijah stayed away from the main house, kept his head down, worked with the kind of invisible efficiency that he perfected over 19 years of survival. But he could feel things shifting around him, like the air before a storm. Dawson was everywhere suddenly, watching the field hands, inspecting the quarters, asking questions, looking for something, waiting for something. The other enslaved people felt it too. That collective holding of breath that happened when white folks got agitated about something. Rations got smaller. Work hours got longer. The whip came out more often for smaller infractions. Moses had been right. When one person drew attention, everybody paid for it. On the third night, Elijah woke to find a scrap of paper slipped under the door of his cabin. He knew what it was before he even unfolded it, before he saw Catherine's careful handwriting in the moonlight filtering through the cracks. The well. Midnight. Please. See. His mother was awake. She always seemed to be awake these days, watching him with eyes full of fear and resignation. Don't go, she whispered. I have to. Why? What's left to say? What's left to do? I don't know, Mama. But she wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Sarah closed her eyes. Then God help you both. Elijah waited until the quarters were silent, until even the night insects seemed to have quieted their songs. Then he slipped out into the darkness, moving like a shadow between shadows. The well was on the edge of the main house property, close enough to be convenient, but far enough from the overseer's quarters to offer some privacy. At least, that's what they both hoped. Catherine was already there, wrapped in a dark shawl despite the heat, her face pale in the moonlight. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. Thank God, she breathed. I thought you might not come. I shouldn't have, Elijah said honestly. Neither of us should be here. I know, but I had to tell you, Dawson's planning something. I heard him talking to Thomas this afternoon. They think I couldn't hear, but I was in the upstairs hallway and their voices carried. Elijah, they're going to set a fire. Elijah's blood went cold. Where? The cotton barn. Tomorrow night. They're going to burn it and blame you. Say you did it out of revenge, or madness, or, her voice broke, or because I put ideas in your head. Either way, they'll have cause to. She couldn't finish the sentence. Hang him. That's what she couldn't say. They'd have cause to hang him. Why are you telling me this? Elijah asked quietly. You could just let it happen. Let me take the blame. Nobody would question it. Nobody would think less of you. Catherine looked at him like he'd slapped her. Is that what you think of me? That I'd let an innocent man die to protect my reputation? I think you're a white woman in Georgia in 1851. And I think survival makes people do things they never thought they'd do. Then you don't know me at all. Her voice was fierce now, urgent. Listen to me. I've been thinking about this for 3 days. You need to run. Tonight. I have money. She pulled a small pouch from beneath her shawl. $100. It's not much, but it's enough to get you north. There are people who help stations on the railroad. You know about that. Elijah interrupted shocked. I'm not as ignorant as people assume. My father, before he died, he had sympathies. He never acted on them, but he told me things, showed me maps. I know there are routes, safe houses. You can make it, Elijah. You're clever enough, careful enough. Elijah stared at the pouch in her hand. $100. Freedom money. Escape money. Everything he dreamed of his entire life, being offered to him by a white woman who should have been his enemy. If I run, he said slowly, they'll know you helped me. They'll know you warned me. What do you think Dawson will do then? Catherine's jaw set. That's not your concern. Like hell it's not. You stood up for me, Mrs. Whitmore. You put yourself between me and them, and now you're trying to save me again. You think I can just take your money and run and never think about what happens to you after? I can handle Dawson. No, you can't. Elijah's voice rose, then he caught himself, dropped it back to a harsh whisper. You saw what happened in that parlor. Hammond didn't believe you. The Reverend didn't believe you. They're willing to overlook $800 in theft because you're a woman and Dawson's a man. And that's just how the world works. You think they'll protect you if you help a slave escape? Then what do you suggest? Catherine asked, and there was something desperate in her voice now. That we just wait for them to burn the barn and hang you? That we do nothing? No, Elijah said, his mind racing. We catch them. We prove they set the fire. We turn their trap back on them. Catherine stared at him. That's insane. How would we even? Tomorrow night, when they go to burn the barn, we are there. Both of us. Hidden. Watching. And when they light the fire, we have witnesses. Real witnesses. Not just accusations, but people who saw it happen. Who would believe us? Who would believe you over Dawson? Not just us. We get others. White folks. Neighbors. Tell them you've heard threats, that you're worried about the property. Ask them to help you keep watch. They don't need to know we suspect Dawson specifically, just that someone might try to burn the barn. Then, when Dawson shows up with a torch, Elijah let the implication hang. Catherine was silent for a long moment, thinking. It's dangerous, she finally said. If it goes wrong, I'm dead anyway. At least this way, I'm fighting back. We're fighting back, Catherine corrected. If we do this, we do it together. There was something in her voice, something in the way she looked at him in that moment, that made Elijah's breath catch. This wasn't about accounts anymore. Wasn't about theft or reputation. This was about two people who'd somehow found each other across an impossible divide, who'd recognized something in each other that the world said shouldn't exist. Mrs. Whitmore, he started. Catherine, she interrupted softly. When it's just us, please, call me Catherine. I can't do that, ma'am. That's a line I can't cross. We are already so far past the lines, Catherine said, and there was something like grief in her voice. We've been past them since that first night in the parlor. Maybe we've been past them from the moment you looked at those ledgers, and I saw your mind working, saw you as the intelligent, capable man you are. She stopped. Instead of property, Elijah finished quietly. Yes. They stood there in the moonlight, the well between them, an impossible distance that was also no distance at all. And Elijah understood then what was happening, what had been happening all along. They were falling, not into romance, exactly, because romance was a luxury neither of them could afford, but into recognition, into seeing each other as fully human in a world built on denying the humanity. It was more dangerous than fire, more forbidden than any law on the books. Tomorrow night, Catherine said finally. I'll arrange for witnesses. Mr. Peterson from the neighboring farm, he owes my late husband a debt. And perhaps the Mayfields, good Christian people who'd want to protect property from arsonists. And I'll watch from the barn itself, Elijah said. If they come, I'll see them first. Elijah, if they find you hiding there, they won't. I know every shadow on this plantation. I've been invisible my whole life. One more night won't kill me. But they both knew that was a lie. One more night might kill him. This plan, brave as it was, desperate as it was, could end with Elijah beaten, burned, hanged. Catherine reached out then, actually reached out and took his hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to feel the warmth of her palm against his, to feel the trembling in her fingers. Whatever happens, she said, I want you to know. You've changed something in me. Show me something I needed to see. That's worth something, isn't it? Yes, ma'am, Elijah whispered. That's worth something. They separated then, slipping back into their respective worlds. But something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be taken back. Tomorrow night would bring fire, would bring truth, would bring an ending to this story, one way or another. Neither of them slept that last night before the trap was sprung. The next day crawled by like a wounded animal. Elijah went through the motions, hauling water, polishing silver, keeping his face carefully blank while his mind spun with plans and fears and possibilities. Every time he saw Dawson, the overseer was wearing this smile, this satisfied smirk that said he knew something, had something planned, was just waiting for the right moment to spring his trap. Catherine played her part perfectly. By noon, she'd sent word to 3 neighboring families about her concerns, vague worries about suspicious activity near the cotton barn, requests for their assistance in keeping watch over her property. Mr. Peterson arrived first, a gruff older man with a rifle and a sense of duty to his dead neighbor Charles. Then came young Robert Mayfield and his father, both of them eager to help a widow in distress. Probably just vagrants passing through, Peterson said, settling into position near the main house with a clear view of the barn. But can't be too careful with cotton prices what they are. A fire could ruin you, Mrs. Whitmore. That's exactly my concern, Catherine said, her voice steady despite the fear Elijah could see in her eyes when she glanced his direction. I'm grateful for your assistance, gentlemen. As darkness fell, Elijah made his way to the barn. Not inside, that would be too obvious, too trapped, but to a position behind the old tobacco shed about 30 yards away. From there, he could see the barn's entrance clearly, could watch for anyone approaching. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows, bright enough to identify faces. The witnesses were positioned closer to the house, watching from windows and porches. They couldn't see Elijah's hiding spot, which was intentional. Whatever happened tonight, he needed to be invisible until the crucial moment. 10 o'clock passed, then 11. The night insects sang their songs, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Elijah's legs cramped from crouching, but he didn't move, couldn't move. Then, just after midnight, he saw them. 2 figures, moving low and fast across the open ground between the overseer's quarters and the barn. Even in moonlight, Elijah recognized them instantly. Dawson and his nephew Thomas. Dawson carried something, a jug, probably kerosene. Thomas had a bundle of rags. They thought they were being careful, thought the widow was asleep, thought her house servants were safely locked in their quarters, thought nobody would see them until the flames were already eating through the barn and it was too late to prove anything. Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the moment everything depended on. Dawson reached the barn door, started to open it, and that's when Catherine's voice rang out across the yard, clear and commanding. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Mayfield. The barn, someone's at the barn. Lanterns flared to life. Shouts erupted. Men came running. Dawson froze like a rabbit caught in lamplight, the kerosene jug still in his hands, guilt written across his face plain as day. He'd been caught. And this time, there were witnesses who mattered. What happened next unfolded fast, voices shouting, Peterson and the Mayfields converging on the barn with their rifles raised. Dawson dropping the kerosene jug and trying to run, but there was nowhere to go, not with 3 armed men blocking his path and the evidence literally at his feet. What in God's name? Peterson started, then saw the jug, saw the rags in Thomas's hands, saw the guilt written plain across both their faces. Were you about to burn this barn? No, we were checking, Dawson stammered, but his lies died in his throat because there was no explanation that made sense, no story that could cover what they'd been caught doing. Catherine appeared then, still in her nightdress with a shawl thrown over, looking every inch the frightened widow. Thank God you saw them, she said, her voice trembling just right. Thank God you were here. The Mayfields grabbed Dawson and Thomas both, held them firm while Peterson examined the kerosene jug. This is arson, he said flatly. Attempted arson of your property, Mrs. Whitmore. These men were going to burn you out. But why? Catherine asked, though of course she knew why. They all knew why. Dawson found his voice then, found his rage. Because she's protecting that boy of hers, that Elijah. He put her up to this, poisoned her against me, and I was just trying to what? Peterson interrupted. To commit arson and blame it on a Negro? That's what you were doing. The silence that followed was damning. because Dawson couldn't deny it, couldn't explain it away. He'd been caught red-handed, and now his motivations, his lies, his theft, all of it, were laid bare. Sheriff Hammond was summoned, came riding up angry at being woken, but his anger died when he saw the scene. The kerosene, the witnesses, Dawson's desperate attempts to justify himself. Even Hammond couldn't ignore this, couldn't protect his friend from three respected white men who'd seen the crime in progress. "You're under arrest," Hammond said finally, heavily. "Both of you." As they led Dawson away, the overseer who'd thought himself untouchable, who'd stolen and schemed and tried to burn it all down rather than face consequences, he looked back at Catherine with pure hatred. "This ain't over," he snarled. "People will know. They'll know what you did, what you are." "What I am," Catherine interrupted coldly, "is a woman who protected her property from a thief and an arsonist. That's all anyone needs to know." And somehow, impossibly, it worked. The story that spread through Hancock County wasn't about impropriety or forbidden closeness. It was about a clever widow who'd caught her corrupt overseer trying to destroy evidence of his theft. About Catherine Whitmore's bravery and cunning. Elijah stayed invisible through it all. Stayed silent. Stayed alive. 3 days later, Catherine called him to the house one final time. When he entered the parlor, in daylight now, properly, with nothing to hide, she handed him papers. "Freedom papers." "You're free," she said simply. "I'm manumitting you. You can go north, start a life, be safe." Elijah stared at the documents, at his name written in legal script, at the signature that made him a person instead of property. "Why?" he whispered. Catherine smiled sadly. "Because you showed me what courage looks like. Because you trusted me when you had no reason to. Because—" she paused. "Because in another world, another time, we might have been friends. Real friends. And I want you to live, Elijah. I want you to be free and alive and happy somewhere far from here." There were tears on his face. On hers too. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing me, for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for the same." He left Georgia that week. Made it north. Made a life. Lived to be an old man who told his grandchildren stories about a summer in 1851 when a widow and a slave caught a thief and changed each other's lives forever. Catherine never remarried. Ran her plantation successfully for 30 more years. Became known as a shrewd businesswoman. Died respected and remembered. They never saw each other again. But neither ever forgot. Some stories don't end with happiness. They end with survival, with dignity, with two people who found each other's humanity across an impossible divide and held on to it. Even when the world demanded, they let go. That's worth something. Maybe everything.